Vonda N. McIntyre died in 2019 and will probably be most remembered for her 1978 novel Dreamsnake, which won both the Hugo and the Nebula Award. She also wrote a number of Star Trek novels in the 1980s, so it's not a surprise that Bantam picked her to be one of the writers of their new Star Wars books. Unfortunately, The Crystal Star didn't do super well. It made it to number 8 on the New York Times bestseller list for the week of November 27th, 1994, and was ultimately on the list for 2 weeks. So my recollections of this book were nothing. I remembered nothing. This was probably a conscious decision on my part because having reread it, I'm not sure I would want to remember anything here. However, on the Princess Leia costume count, we were looking pretty good. In the beginning of the story, when she first finds out that her children were kidnapped, she's wearing fancy diplomatic robes. She then changes from them into a sort of tunic and leggings look. And then when she goes undercover as the bounty hunter Lalila, she goes very method, wears extreme
Purple
blue eyeshadow and puts streaks in her hair. So I guess maybe you could say I lied. I did remember a little bit from this book. Specifically, I remembered the hair dye just wriggling its way through her hair in a very worm-like fashion. So a quick summary. Princess Leia's children are kidnapped, and she and Chewbacca set off undercover to rescue them. Meanwhile, Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and a blue C-3PO are headed to Asylum Station or Crisis Station in search of rumors of weird goings-ons and possibly some Jedi. So I'm going to come right out. I personally love Dreamsnake. I love some of McIntyre's works, but Crystal Star is a hot mess. I'm not even sure if you could use the word hot mess to describe it. It's just irredeemably strange. Luke, who is very prominent on the cover, probably could have been eliminated from this book without any issues. He's just there. We don't even get inside his head, and the little bit we see of him, Han's just complaining about him and thinking about what a weirdo he is. He falls under the sway of Waru far too easily, is willing to kill himself in the end, and he's a mess. He also continues to be weirdly overpowered in that when they're undercover on the station, Han has grown a beard and C-3PO is, like I said, he's purple, but Luke uses the Force to make him look like someone else. This seems like such an overpowered thing to do. Like, why don't we see people in other stories using the Force to look like someone else? I think that in the Black Fleet Crisis book, Luke maybe uses this skill again, but it's just stupid and unbelievable, and I can't buy that Jedi actually use this instead of, dressing up like a normal person. Han is grumpy and gets drunk a lot and complains. There's a very strange section near the beginning where he says that it's perfectly fine for him to flirt with other people, which I guess is going to be foreshadowing that we run into one of his exes in this book, but he's just not a pleasant guy in this one, and not even in the weirdly jealous way that he was in Courtship of Princess Leia or even in Dark Apprentice. He's just a drunk and a grump. I appreciate that when Leia's children are kidnapped, the first thing she does is just take off immediately to track them down, which is 100% what I see her doing. She wouldn't let any of her duties or other responsibilities stand in the way of her family, especially after the destruction of her planet. Her family is all she has, and so I 100% buy that she would take off and try to track them down. But the way that she's written comes off, I don't want to say whiny, but weird. In the first chapter, perhaps to build suspense and that we don't know what's going on, she keeps reiterating, her children are gone, her children are gone, the bomb, her children are gone. And it doesn't really build suspense for me. It just makes me think badly of her, makes her seem weak. which she's not. And I don't think McIntyre was trying to do. It's odd. There are a lot of parts of this book that are just really oddly written, which, like I said, coming from someone who won the Nebula and the Hugo Award is really strange to find. So I've said that we follow along in the head of Leia and Han on their two separate missions. But since the Solo children are kidnapped, that means we also need an inside view into what's happening with them. So in this case, that means that we're inside the head of Jaina Solo, who's 5 years old. And we're also inside the head of Tigris, a preteen/teen boy who works for the bad guy, Hethrer. Now, Jaina's voice doesn't always work for me. She seems a bit older than 5, which is weird because when we encounter Anakin, he seems much, much younger than 3.5. But on the whole, I actually sort of like the section with Jaina. She had things to do, and like her mom, when she realized that she could rescue everyone and she could get out of here, she didn't just rescue her brother, she rescued all the other children who had been sold into space slavery. I love that she had something to do that played to her strengths, which was that she is mechanically minded and she's curious. And it was great to see her in a plotline like this, especially because in later books from Del Rey, people didn't really know what to do with Jaina and just kept giving her endless boyfriends. So I enjoyed seeing a 5-year-old Jaina who's smart and brave and not afraid to try things. The villains in this one, though, they really don't work for me at all. Hethrer is just your stereotypical evil Force user trained by Darth Vader. He's like in charge of an organization called the Empire Reborn, which it's right on the lid there, like, really don't have to explain it. And he's in league with Waru, who just... Okay, Waru. Waru is from another dimension or another galaxy. He's giant gold scale viscous blob. When he talks to people, he uses the informal thou to like his cult members. He can heal people, but he also kills people so that he can steal their energy to try to get back to where he came from. Luke is just like completely enthralled by him. And in the end, the Hethrer tries to sacrifice Anakin Solo to Waru, but instead Luke jumps in, and then Leia jumps in, and then Han jumps in after them in this golden jelly. And the thing that brings them back is the children being like, come back, come back. So Waru eats Hethrer, and I guess he goes back to where he came from. There's probably an interesting plot line in there dealing with cults and healing and the threat of not healing, but Waru is just so weird. The fact that he's a golden blob, it's just so hard to wrap your head around that it's difficult for me to see what McIntyre is trying to do there. And I know she's trying to do something really interesting, but it fails for me. In the same way with Hethrer, we sort of have this interesting plot line that even though the New Republic has outlawed slavery, slavery is still going on. He's kidnapping these children and selling them into slavery, and that's sort of interesting. Sort of. But at the same time, you've got things like one of the children is a centaur. Like, it outright says she's a centaur. And I'm not doubting that there's aliens that look like centaurs in the Star Wars universe, because all you have to do is look at the Mos Eisley Cantina, and you've got like a wolf man and a devil man, but centaurs. Sometimes writers can go too far in Star Wars trying to come up with a galaxy far, far away equivalent of something we have in the real world. So instead of glass, we'll have transparent steel, and, you know, instead of elevators, we'll have turbo lifts. So while some of those invented words can really throw you out of the story just because you have to, wait a minute, what is transparent steel? At the same time, the presence of so many Earthisms also can pull me out of the story at least, and running across centaurs and cookies and things like that. It's hard for me to deal. I like the presence of Han's ex in this, Zaveri, although we're not really given much about her background. We know she had a family that was killed or taken from her by the Empire, and we know that she works to sort of, I guess, scam Imperials. But her backstory is left pretty vague enough that A.C. Crispin is able to fill it in more in the Han Solo trilogy. But I liked seeing her. I like getting to see someone that Han used to be involved with. And I did, in a way, enjoy her ambivalence, both that she really got sucked into the Waru cult, but at the same time she knew that something was going on that wasn't right and needed to be addressed. On Leia's quest for her children, she decides to become a bounty hunter, and she decides to use a nickname she had as a child, Lalila. This is the point where Leia and Chewie go very method. They don't just change their names, they change their appearance. And when McIntyre writes as Leia the bounty hunter, she doesn't think of herself as Leia. She thinks of herself as Lalila. Like, in her internal narration, she's referring to herself as Lalila, and she's referring to Leia as a completely different person. Your mileage may vary on how well that worked for you. That did not work for me very well, and it was jarring every time I encountered it. And I guess another weird thing I noticed, the weird lack of continuity between some of the books, especially when you read them in the order that they were published, is that there's not really a consensus on things that I think would be very important to know in the galaxy. For instance, when Disney retconned, restarted the Star Wars expanded universe, we had a really great novel from Claudia Gray that was about when the galaxy as a whole learned about Leia's background, her biological family. In Bloodline, it was definitely a key moment when the galaxy found out that her birth father was Darth Vader, and it led to her losing a lot of the power that she had in the Senate, and in a way led to her forming the resistance against the New Order. In the Bantam era books, though, there doesn't seem to be any consensus on the exact moment when the galaxy learned that Darth Vader was her biological father. And so we have bits like in the Thrawn trilogy where Mara Jade is very surprised to learn that Luke is the son of Darth Vader. But then again, in the Crystal Star, which is set 5 years after the Thrawn trilogy, we have people just announcing that Anakin Solo is the grandchild of Darth Vader. I don't know if this is something that happened in Dark Empire and I just completely forgot about, but every time it happens, I'm like, when? When did everyone know? When was this made public? Why do I not know about this? Likewise, the more we learn about other Force users in the Bantam books, the more confusing it gets. In the Crystal Star, we have Hethrer, who's from this humanoid race that was destroyed by the Empire, and he was an acolyte of Vader. And we also meet Releo, who was his former lover from the same humanoid species and was like a failed acolyte of Vader. Now, Hethrer and Releo, it's not subtly done. We can tell that he's evil because he suppresses the children's ability to use the Force, and he's obviously selling people into slavery, and he's the head of the Empire Reborn. But Releo is good because she can only use the Force to heal people and soothe people. And I would really like to see a bad guy at this point who's a Force healer. That would be so interesting. How you could use the dark side to, instead of heal people, make people worse. But it's very black and white at this point. There's no gray. There's no, how does this work? And hopefully other authors will explore that because I find it interesting. Another, I guess, continuity issue I have with Crystal Star is just the weird ways in which people's Force senses are repressed or pushed back. Apparently Hethrer has the ability to just dampen down on the children's Force abilities. To prove that they're able to move up to the next rank, they have to use the Force to activate a lightsaber. But he actively suppresses the alien non-human children from being able to do that. And while Jaina and Jacen Solo are imprisoned on his world craft, Jaina finds that she can't do big things with the Force. She can't make a shield to protect her siblings, but she can manipulate molecules to make light or to move sand. And when Luke and the other characters are on the station by the Crystal Star, they're unable to use the Force and they feel sick. But it's not like when you're in the presence of an Issa Lamiri, where you can't use the Force, but you seem perfectly fine and healthy. It's like the star crystallizing creates this resonance with the Force. And I guess Waru almost has like an anti-Force. And it's an interesting development, but also it's not used again. So we never really get the level of detail that I would like for these updates and developments and changes to the Force to really make sense for me. So, all in all, the Crystal Star is not a good addition to the Star Wars canon, just because it's so strange, so bizarre, so unlike anything we have ever seen. Some characters could be completely eliminated from the story, and I feel like we wouldn't suffer at all. Some characters have interesting plot lines, but the way they're characterized and their personalities written is just off-putting. Some characters have interesting plot lines that maybe don't 100% make sense, but I still, enjoyed. It was a change of pace. I guess what I'm most frustrated by is that McIntyre has written some amazing, innovative novels, and this just isn't one of them. If you wanted to go back and reread the Bantamera Star Wars books, I feel like The Crystal Star is eminently skippable just because people don't really use what happened in it. It's like a blip that can be easily forgotten. And I'm glad, because I would very much like to forget this. So next time, I'm going to jump right into the first book in the Corellian trilogy by Roger McBride Allen, Ambush at Corellia.